Let's take a look at how you start a domain controller. When it comes to these domain controller in EAP6, JBoss EAP6 here, under that folder you will find a domain folder, a special folder called domain. Underneath that you have a configuration folder. Here you find a domain XML file and a host XML files, and then we have, by default, you have few host XML file available. But basically when you're starting a domain controller, you will use this domain XML file and also this host master XML file already pre-configured, so it actually acts as the master controller or domain controller. Now when you start up, basically you specify these XML file when you start up using the domain.sh command. Here's, for example, let me show you. When you start a domain, I happen to have under the op folder created a special directory called machine1. Part of the lab you'll end up doing that, and then I copy the domain folder just right from here, the domain folder from the EAP6. I copy it over to this machine1 folder, and then I'm trying to start the servers using this particular directory here. So if you take a look at my script, I have created a simple script here, hostmaster.sh. Within the script, I'm using the domain.sh command, which is part of the bin folder, JBoss EAP6 bin folder. I'm specifying the host --host config, which actually specifying the host master XML file, and also the location of this configuration file where this domain base directory is, the JBoss domain base directory. Using that option, I'm specifying in this case home instructor JB248 opt machine1 domain folder, which is this folder in my case, this particular domain folder under this structure. Now I can also specify --domain config. Now that's not required since I'm actually using the default domain XML file. So I'm actually simply using this domain XML file by default there. But if I'm using another domain XML file, for example, my domain XML file, then I need to specify part of the script, just like the --host config. I have to do a --domain config and specify the specific file. So that's how you start this the domain controller. Now, how does it actually identify that this particular server as acting as a master controller or domain controller? Is basically in the host XML file, there's a special tag called domain controller tag, and it will have local. That actually specifies that server as a domain controller, and all the other controller will act as a slave controller. So the domain controller, another name, we can call it as a master controller, and the slave controller, the other controllers, we can call them as slave controller. Within those other controller host XML file, it will have a remote tag which actually pointing to the domain controller location. So the actual domain controller host XML file will actually, the tag will have local. Let's take a look at an example here. I'm looking at the host master XML file, which is part of the configuration folder in the domain. The host master XML file, it actually have a domain controller local. So by using that script here, domain.sh --host config, I'm using this host XML file, which is the host master XML file, and the default domain XML file, so I don't have the --domain config tag. I don't need to specify that. Then also I'm specifying here the location of my configuration folder for this domain, which is the machine1 domain. So that's how you actually start up the domain controller. Now the domain XML file pretty much will contain all the necessary information, like for example